Hi, welcome to Platforming Marketing, my keynote from Martech East this week. So this summer, I stumbled into a hornet's nest. Let me assure you, you know when you stumble into a hornet's nest. Now, the story begins about a mile from where the conference was. If you go out the conference center to Massachusetts Avenue, across the river, you come to MIT. Now, MIT is one of those landmarks of Boston, or as Harvard students sometimes like to refer to it, that little technical school down the river. But when most people think of MIT, they think of things like engineering, and science, and rigor. MIT also has a business school, the MIT Sloan School of Management. Full disclosure, this is where I went to get an MBA. But don't hold that against them. They're otherwise a perfectly fine institution. And again, you know, sort of like the same assumptions of characteristics of, okay, this is going to be rigorous and analytical. One of the things that the Sloan School specializes in is actually information systems, IT. Well, of course, I mean, IT, it's right there in the name, MIT. All right, so this rigorous approach to IT. Now, you've probably heard of Harvard Business Review, right? Popular business magazine, research from business school professors. Sloan also has a publication, the MIT Sloan Management Review. And this summer, I came across an article in the Sloan Management Review that was really fascinating to me. The headline was, "Implement first, ask questions later," or not at all. And the article was actually talking about how even large companies, Fortune 100 companies, had been evolving the way they adopted software. And in many cases, they were abandoning these like incredibly rigorous requirements gathering, evaluation processes they used to go through before they would buy software, and instead increasingly just getting software and trying it. I found this really interesting. So I do what I do with all articles I find interesting. I shared it on social media. And while there are definitely some people who are like, oh yeah, wow, that is interesting. We see a pattern like that in our own company. I'd say most people's reaction to it was, well, something like this. Like, what, are you crazy? I'm like, let me try and map this out a bit. So, right, the traditional way we used to adopt software, particularly in the enterprise, was a very waterfall-like process, right? We would gather requirements, we would evaluate options, we would come up with this plan, and only then would we think about building or buying, and eventually get down to adoption. And this process could take weeks, it could take months. But this new model of software adoption that we increasingly see, even in the enterprise, is kind of almost like an agile approach. I put these things in quotes, not, you know, exact methodologies, but this idea of a much more bias for action, iterative approach where we start by adopting software, often on a small scale, possibly as freemium or free trial. We use it, we learn it. If we like it, we might add more use cases. If it's working well for us, we might expand to more teams and users. So I thought, all right, well, yeah, I'll share this on social media and maybe this will help people see, oh yeah, there are definitely two valid ways to do this. Well, this was the reaction that was essentially kicking the hornet's nest because, yeah, got a lot of feedback there, including like this purple emoji. I'd never actually seen this purple emoji on LinkedIn before. LinkedIn says it's a reaction for people saying, oh, I'm curious, like, tell me more. But based on some of the comments, I actually think what people are saying is, you're curious, man. I mean, like, this is just, like, are you crazy? You know, just sounds like chaos. So, to be honest, I haven't seen this polarized of a reaction to something I shared on social media since years ago when I claimed that shadow marketing can be just as bad as shadow IT. And, yeah, I still get letters over that one. But what's going on there, right? I mean, smart people I admire on both sides of those reactions, how could they have such a polarized view? I think it really comes down to anchoring. I mean, if you spend your days working on large enterprise systems, CRMs and marketing automation platforms and CDPs and DXPs, right? I mean, the thought of saying, oh, well, we'll just swap out, that DXP for a different one. We'll try that this week, right? Just sounds totally crazy and insane. Get that reaction. But if I ask people what sort of requirements gathering process you went through for, say, adding an app to your mobile phone, people would say, well, probably not much, right? You get these, you try it. If it doesn't work, you might try something else. Now I get it. You might be saying, like, Scott, I mean, adopting apps on your mobile phone is not the same thing as adopting software in your business. Although, things are changing. So OpenView, which is a leading venture capital group based here in Boston, this summer they had produced a report on the state of product-led growth. They surveyed over 500 SaaS companies, and they found that 58% of them now offer a freemium or free trial version of their software. Their go-to-market approach is to say, hey, just get the software and try it. And if you like it, then we can expand and, eventually provide you with a paid solution. Now, I know you might be saying, okay, that might work for certain consumer apps or maybe for small business. But there's no way that, enterprises are actually going to adopt software this way. Freemium would never work in the enterprise. Well, Aaron Levy, the CEO of Box, has a slightly different view of that. He said earlier this year, if I gave you a nickel every time I heard freemium will never work in the enterprise, you could be the largest shareholder of Zoom and Slack. Part of what OpenView found in their product-led growth report was that companies that had this free trial, freemium go-to-market motion, one of the benefits of that is their software, frankly, was just a lot easier for people to start using and getting value out of it. Which, kind of makes sense, right? If your whole, business model is say, hey, try the software, see how great it is for you, and then buy it, you're going to make that process as easy and as friendly as possible. And it turns out this is actually a pretty valuable thing for people. This is one of the reasons why we've seen this explosion in the number of apps, SaaS-based apps, that companies of all sizes are now adopting. It's easier to do it, and you can get value out of these tools quickly. Now, again, I'm not saying that every piece of software you adopt, is right for that model. There's definitely some things that are better suited to a waterfall approach, others that work better for agile, and these aren't an either or choice either, right? Any piece of software you adopt, you can go through some degree of requirements gathering and evaluation, and then this process of expanding use cases as you go along, right? So it's not black and white. But I think it's interesting to put out on a chart where the balance between these things are. If a piece of software is going to cost a lot of money, or it's going to have risks associated with it, or it's going to have a lot of dependencies across your business, you're probably more likely to want to have a heavier planning and evaluation process for it. Makes sense. I would also say the more certainty you have about the software that you're adopting, we know exactly what we want it to do, we know how we're going to get value out of it, we're not expecting that to change over the next 5 years. The more certainty you have, the easier it is to actually plan this out very carefully in a waterfall approach. But I would argue in a world where things are changing rapidly, increasingly more and more of our tech adoption actually does happen under uncertainty. And it's under uncertainty that this more agile approach is applicable to a broader set of software that we choose. So it's interesting, if you look at this over time, I would essentially say that 20, 30 years ago, most things were adopted using this waterfall approach, right? Because software was on-premise, it was monolithic, it was expensive. It was sort of the right adoption model for what software was. But we really took a leap, particularly over this past decade, to more cloud-based platforms, software that's provided in a freemium and free trial mode, service-oriented architectures. That this agile approach to adopting software has just made a lot more sense. And I suspect the way the trends are headed is we're going to see even more of that in the next 10 years ahead. Now, this gets us to new territory, right? I mean, the models of software adoption and how we manage technology throughout the enterprise, it's changing. And we have to figure this out together. And so it's with that, I welcome you to Martech, or the recreated version of the Martech Keynote. I am Scott Brinker, at Chief Martech on Twitter, if you want to continue any debate about this over social media. I'll always love to do that. I'm the founding program chair of the Martech Conference. I published the chiefmartech.com blog, and I'm the VP of Platform Ecosystem at HubSpot. I mean, I love Martech 24/7. I'm also the fellow behind this crazy graphic, although I now have a lot of help with Anand Thakur and the entire team at Blue Green to help produce this every year. But yeah, okay, so clearly I love Martech. I mean, people ask me, Scott, do you like anything aside from Martech? And I'm like, yeah, of course, I like more Martech. I know I'm unidimensional, but it's such an interesting dimension. Okay. There are other things I like. I like movies. Anyone remember this movie? Scene from Forrest Gump? One of my favorite movies. Although, even when I'm watching movies, I find myself thinking of Martech. So I'm like watching Forrest Gump, and kind of what comes to mind is, life is like a stack of Martech. I know. This summer, actually, just as an aside, my family, we took a little road trip through California and finally got to visit some of these movie studios. I'd never done that before. And so we actually got to get our photo taken on the bench that they used as the prop in that movie, Forrest Gump. And of course, they give you a box of chocolates to take the photo with, because peak tourist. So that was kind of fun. Well, my all-time favorite movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and the narrative flow of Raiders is a little bit like the Martech conference. Raiders of the Tech Stack, an epic marketing adventure. But the flow is basically Martech starts with my keynote, which is usually a little bit more about the theory of Martech. So what I try and do is distill patterns that I've seen happening across the Martech industry over the past year, and maybe suggest some frameworks that are very broadly applicable to how this discipline is evolving. But then all the rest of Martech is about the practice of Martech in the field, what it's actually like. Some of you might be looking at this and saying, I know that feeling. Budget season, right? And while I had Indiana Jones, I just wanted to say thank you for everyone who helped make Martech come together, all the attendees, the sponsors, the incredible set of speakers who shared so many of their real-world experiences and best practices, our moderators, Erica and Jeff and Dwayne and Anand, and the producers of Martech, Chris Elwell and the team at Third Door Media. Just all the work they put into bringing this show together is just, it's impressive. And I also want to give a shout out to our sponsors of the opening night networking reception, Workfront and OneTrust. So just to give you a little sense of what happened at Martech, is after the keynotes, we had 3 editorial tracks, as well as a track for solution partners, solution providers, and a little Martech theater that was happening in the expo with these shorter lightning talks. But on the editorial tracks, we organized them around 3 topics: technology and operations, data and analytics, and marketing and leadership. And kind of the way I think about those is as a metaphor, right? Technology and operations, this is the machine. This is the car we have. Data and analytics is the fuel and the exhaust, what's coming in and out of this machine. And then marketing and leadership is really about Well, if you take that car metaphor, it's about the destination and the route. Where do we want to go and how do we get there? Or, as I like to think of it in shorthand, stacks, facts, and acts. And I know it's a really intense couple days, so in between sessions, we were sure to have plenty of snacks. And when people came to registration, they were able to pick up their packs, and in the evening, they were able to, take a little time to relax. And yeah, all right, this is about the time someone comes in and is like, okay, stop that, Scott. No rhyming, no singing, let's move on. All right, fair enough. So one of the other things we changed this year with Martech was we planted a flag. We put a new tagline, that summed up what is the vision of where Martech is, where is it headed. We declared Martech is marketing. And the reaction to that was, well, that's kind of like stumbling into a hornet's nest again. Certainly some people were like, yes, exactly, Martech is marketing. And a bunch of other people were like, are you crazy? I mean, marketing is so much more than Martech. How dare you? And some of this, I think, was just a debate around semantics. I mean, we weren't claiming that Martech is the equivalent of marketing and all things marketing must be, Martech. What we were saying, though, is Martech really has become a proper subset of marketing. You can't do great marketing these days, without having the technology and operations supporting it. That's the nature of the digital world. Now, for those of you who prefer a little more graphical version of this, I picture it this way, right? Marketing, the whole field, Martech is a subset of that. Now, we could have a debate as to how big that subset is, and I think it is growing year over year considerably. Which brings us to the concept of Martech Maturity. Now, I have a confession to make. I have absolutely no home repair skills whatsoever. I mean, all right, if it can be fixed with a hammer, I'm your handyman. So hang a picture on a wall, okay, I can do that. Screw a, cabinet door back in. I mean, you can use a hammer on a screw, right? They're kind of almost equivalent. That's legal. Toaster's broken. All right, bang, bang, bang. 50-50 chance that might fix it. Okay, so, I mean, a hammer's useful, but limited in its utility and its use cases. Now, my father-in-law, of course, is brilliant at home repair. He knows how to use all the tools in the toolbox. And so, my wife makes a list of things that need to be fixed around the house that she wouldn't trust with me. And whenever he comes over to visit, we then bribe him with food and wine to see if he will help, make the fixes. And he generously does, and it's always wonderful. It's just amazing, like, what he's able to, fix. I'm like, wow, I have no idea how you do that. And of course, after he does it, he's, willing to explain in great detail to me how he fixed it. I'm like, oh, well, the reason the gate wasn't closing here is we needed, to take off, this bracket and, replace the screen and, there was some other widget. And I'm just, listening. I'm like, yeah, no, that makes sense. It's all ball bearings these days, right? But I have to admit, I imagine if I was good at home repair, in fact, actually, if my entire family was good at home repair, wow, things we could do, right? It wouldn't just be like fixing things the moment they were broken. It would also be all these like home improvement projects we could do. We'd spend our weekends at Home Depot. We might buy properties and fix them up, have our own reality show. It'd be really awesome if those skills were distributed throughout our entire family instead of just embedded, with my father-in-law. I guess in theory, someday there will be a robot that could just do this all magically for us, the HAL 9000 home repair unit. HAL, open garage bay doors. But yeah, that's we're not there. We do have a little bit of, robotic help, in the home maintenance side, like there's Roomba. All right, very good for that particular task. So this all overextended metaphor, I'd say, is really about the evolution of maturity in Martech. I mean, most companies start with Martech as a kind of a hammer, an assisted thing, like, oh, okay, email marketing. If it can be fixed by sending out a, batch blast email, yes, we can do that. Numbers down for the month, batch some email. Increase customer retention, batch an email. Again, helpful in some places, but generally quite limited. Embedded is when we actually have a marketing technologist or a marketing operations capability in the marketing department that can really use all of the tools, and just help take our marketing to the next level. But where things get really interesting is when these Martech skills get absorbed throughout the entire marketing department, and many marketers, all marketers, are in a position to leverage them and apply them successfully in their work. Now, some people talk about a Martech-dominated stage of marketing where it's like artificial intelligence that just does it all for us. I think we're ways away from that. But, again, kind of like Roomba, we do have very specific use cases of AI that are incredibly helpful in marketing today. So if we zoom in on this a bit, this Martech maturity, you think of marketing as overlapping circles of many different, teams and functions. And assisted is where they have little pockets of Martech spread throughout them. Embedded is where, okay, you now have this center of excellence, this, marketing tech, marketing operations person or team. And then absorbed is, you still have that, strong center that's acting as the leader in the governance of the Martech capabilities, but the capabilities themselves get widely absorbed throughout the entire marketing team. And you might say, like, where's the dominated case? And I'm like, all right, well, yeah, I mean, if there's this magical unicorn version of, AI-dominated Martech, we're not there yet. So we're really just focused on these. In fact, let's really just focus on these two on the right here. I mean, most companies that have a marketing operations team today are at this embedded state, right? Marketing ops, marketing tech is a center of excellence. But I think as we move forward, the question is, how do we get to an absorbed stage of Martech maturity? Now, one of the questions we could maybe back up and start with is why? Why even bother trying to get, to an absorbed Martech stage? And so let's compare and contrast a bit embedded Martech, this centralized center of excellence versus absorbed Martech, that's spread and distributed much more widely. So some of the things that change there is speed, right? I mean, like whenever you have a centralized function that's providing a service, inevitably there are more demands on them than there are hours in the day or resources available, so as people have demands, they inevitably end up having to wait in a queue, like, all right, well, when it's my turn for, the marketing tech team to get to my ask. Versus when you start to absorb Martech more broadly throughout the organization, increasingly marketers can self-service more of their needs. They don't have to wait on someone else. They can do it themselves. Now, this in turn changes the amount of bandwidth that you have for leveraging Martech in your company, right? Again, if it's going through a centralized function, inevitably, that becomes your bottleneck. You have to sequentially process things through it. Versus when Martech is more absorbed, it's a much broader and parallel processing across everyone in the marketing team. This also has the effect of expanding the creativity that gets brought to the use of Martech, right? I mean, when it's the Martech Center of Excellence that's doing most of the work, a lot of the creativity of how those things get applied is limited to that team. I mean, don't get me wrong, they can bring a lot of creativity to it, but it's the ideas of that subset of people versus the more Martech is wielded across the entire marketing department, then you get all these diverse ideas and imagination from so many different people who can come up with new and innovative ways of harnessing these capabilities. And part of this is just a function of the learning that happens. I mean, we learn by doing. So if the centralized Martech team are the ones who are doing most of the work, then yeah, I mean, they're learning a ton, which is great. But if we really want to be able to empower the rest of the marketing organization, to learn Martech, we have to be able to give them the power to start to work with it on a much more frequent basis, and get that learning widely distributed. And I think this is where you see the differences in sort of the key goals and benefits of these models. I mean, we moved to an embedded center of excellence structure because it was a way to provide controlled efficiency to marketing technology, which is really important in our evolution of maturity. But one of the things we realize now is, in this world of just constant change, there's this other characteristic we want, which is adaptability. And by designing our Martech capabilities so that people throughout the marketing team can experiment on the edge with new ideas, it actually makes our Martech capabilities more adaptable to change as well. Now, all of this really does derive from maybe one key concept, which is providing greater self-service of Martech to marketers, right? So if you want to get to this absorbed stage, you need self-service, which I would just say is not the same as being self-absorbed. So, how do you even tell? What does self-service look like? Well, one of the questions you can ask is, how much can a marketer in your organization self-serve? Do on their own? Can they run a new data analysis? Can they create and publish new website content? Can they collect a new set of data and make sure it gets attached to the appropriate customer records? Can they create automated workflows for their particular functions and processes? Can they launch a new A/B test experiment? I mean, really, anything that you find marketers, want to do, and today they have to raise their hand and say, okay, can someone help me with this? And they have to wait for someone else. Where are the opportunities to put the power in their hands to just do this themselves? I mean, this has been a challenge we've worked with centralized technology capabilities for a long time, right? I mean, going all the way back to, just centralized IT before there even was a marketing, tech function. We still wrestle with this today. I mean, there was a study here by the folks at Point Source just 2 years ago where they asked what the average duration was for a technical initiative from business request to deployment. And just even 2 years ago, only 20% of the respondents said, oh, all right, well, less than 6 months. 42% said, well, usually takes 6 to 12 months before we see that come to deployment. A staggering more than a third say, oh, well, it's more than a year, maybe even more than 2 years. I personally find the 3% who said, we don't know. I envision them yeah, we made that request last century. I've long since retired. I now spend my days playing golf, but maybe they'll get to that someday. This is the challenge, of a centralized service. Is again, there's just always more demand than hours and resources to service them all. So as people have ideas of things they want, they end up having to wait in a queue until that team, can get to them. And then when they do, I mean, these are experts, right? So they're able to build it, and they can maybe build in some, opportunity for feedback and maybe a single iteration. But they can't keep iterating indefinitely because, right, they've got all these other requests that are queuing up as well. So if you then find, oh, well, now that I've got this, I actually want to change something else about it, you have to get back in the queue again for the next iteration. Versus in a self-service model, when you have an idea, you can actually just start building it, start putting it out there and get feedback. And it's really under your control then how quickly and how much time you want to invest in iterations, as long as you see you're getting value out of that process. Now, this is showing the impact that has on time, just a faster delivery of these requests. But the same thing applies to that notion of bandwidth, that again, a centralized service at some level just has to process these things, these projects and ideas sequentially, versus in a self-service mode, you really do get that parallel processing. And so this is really the heart of moving from an embedded stage of Martech to an absorbed stage of Martech. Now, how do you do this? I guess I would start with a, sort of a high-level framework of this. Most of you are, I assume, familiar with the 4 Ps of marketing, right? So I'd like to share with you, I propose, are the 8 Ps of self-service MarTech. And mathematically, this has to be at least twice as good as the 4 Ps of marketing. But we will break it up into these, 2 different categories, technology and people. Now, in technology, one of the things you need to support this absorbed self-service capability is you need platforms that are open. You need platforms that allow other apps to plug into them, that can share data, that can help manage the resolution of data coming from multiple sources, so you can get these participants, from diverse applications and needs, across the company. You also often need partitions within that technology, right? Okay, so if you've got all these people working in parallel, how do you make sure they aren't colliding with each other on the same things? Across web properties and content properties, we can partition sections to different teams. In data structures, we can partition, different owners of, collections of data records or sets of information around that data. Very helpful from a design perspective. You need permissioning, often built into the platforms, providing the access control for who can do what. Really becomes one of the mechanisms by which we provide governance over what people are doing in parallel. And we need perception. And I know, all right, so I confess, I was stretching for a P word just, because it doesn't make sense to have like the 7 Ps and one word that begins with M. But really what I am talking about here is this idea of monitoring. So when you have all these parallel efforts that are happening around, MarTech, it's not feasible to have everyone run everything they plan to do, through the MarTech team, right? That would just get us back to a queued model. So, people generally, are empowered to go doing more things on their own. But you need, at that centralized function, some sort of monitoring to just make sure that, okay, the patterns of behavior there are staying within a set of guardrails of what you want, that things aren't going, off the rails, so monitoring systems across your MarTech stack. Now, on the people side, the 4 things you need is, well, first, you need to give people permission. And this is not the same as permissioning. Permissioning is, the technical access control. Permission is basically management saying to the rest of the marketing team, you are empowered to take these tools and work with them and experiment with them and go do amazing things. Empowerment is the permission to experiment. Now, as part of that, you need to prepare people to be able to do that well. This really comes down to marketing enablement. And it's training them how to be able to use these tools, but it's more than just like training. It's how do you get these, practice groups working together and people sharing the ideas about what they learn, and really turn this into a collective community of people learning what's possible with MarTech together. You need principles for how people are going to apply MarTech. And some of these are, very specific things around, like data privacy, like here's what you need to do to make sure you're compliant with regulations like GDPR. But I think it's also important to have these principles from like a culture and customer code perspective of, how do we leverage MarTech in a way that represents our brand well, that engages customers in the way we feel is right. You want those principles to be really clear. And the last thing you need is passion for this, right? You need passion inside the centralized marketing ops, marketing tech team to want to empower the rest of marketing to leverage these tools. But you also need passion throughout everyone who's going to be using them, right? They have to be excited, about wanting to learn how to do better marketing, how to engage customers better with these tools, and to just be continuously learning. Those of you who were at my Martech Keynote last year, I shared this framework of balancing centralization and decentralization automation and humanization. If you Google the new rules of marketing technology and operations, you can review that whole framework. What I'm talking about here isn't so much a new framework as much as it's really just sort of double clicking into this axis of centralization and decentralization. How do we manage things in centralized marketing ops and marketing tech to empower greater decentralization across the rest of the marketing organization, and for that matter, the rest of the company? And again, one of the things I think about, okay, well, where do you want to give people self-service versus, centralized tools, centralized services? Some of this comes down to, okay, well, things that have low variance can generally be centralized and optimized there. Things that benefit from high variance, different segments, different customer opportunities, where you want to be able to empower marketers to create something, really targeted for, the particular piece of the journey or the particular people they're reaching. That's where you want to have greater decentralization. And even on the human side of this, we can think of these centralized laws. I mean, some of them actually are laws, like, GDPR, that, okay, there's just certain standard ways, we need to be able to execute MarTech. But I think as you get over to the decentralized side of this, we recognize the incredible power of case law, where it's really, we've learned through examples that are very specific to our business and evolve over time as our business evolves, what works and what doesn't and why. Now, I would argue that this self-service model is one of the things that can apply to the more agile approach of adopting SaaS applications in marketing. Again, this isn't for everything, but there are definitely a set of tools that this does work for. I mean, I'm not, we talked about, right, the more costly or risky or, the greater dependencies something has, probably the less likely it is to be, just self-service that, adopt any software you want. So I'm certainly not suggesting that, like, everyone in the company should, hey, I'll get my CRM and you get your CRM and everybody gets a CRM. Right, that wouldn't be a good example. But I am saying that, hey, listen, if the content marketing team wants to get a tool for managing their content calendar that's really designed for them, go for it. If an ABM Tiger team wants to, work with a provider, for buyer intent, off of G2, by all means, go for it. If the sales enablement, marketing group wants to use an interactive content tool for creating calculators and assessments, go for it. If a market research team wants to build into their workflows, sending gift cards to participants as thank yous automatically, hey, go for it. If a local field marketing team wants to use Eventbrite, for running a meetup, hey, go for it. If a product marketing team wants to use Dub for, creating videos to help explain products, go for it. If a team in a different country that wants to be able to engage folks through an SMS campaign because that's what they do in that region, hey, go for it. I mean, literally, there are thousands of tools. And I say that literally because I've counted them by hand. And a large number of them are actually really great use cases for specific marketing opportunities. Now, I know you might be thinking, all right, Scott, this is the theory part of Martech, but I don't know, man. I mean, does this really work? Like, does any real company behave this way? And so I'd like to at least give you one, here in the keynote. So this summer I had a chance to hear Dirk Didascalou, who's a VP at Amazon, give a talk at the MIT Platform Summit. All my favorite loves all coming together in one day. And his presentation was really about the sort of internal operating system of how Amazon deals with this incredible rate of growth that they've been going through over the past couple decades. And there's a lot in his talk, but I want to just pull two things from it that are very relevant. First of all, Amazon really leans into empowering their teams to self-service things. They love this idea of hiring builders and giving them the documentation and the tools to go off and just build things, just try things. Now you might say, well, wait a second. Wow, you have all these different people trying things. Aren't you going to run into the problem that, you have different teams trying the same thing in parallel? That doesn't sound very efficient. And Dirk's insight there was, Amazon's okay with that, actually. One of the sayings they have in the company, apparently, is 2 is better than 0. It's much better to have 2 teams kind of build the same thing in parallel, because let's face it, there's, with any new experiment, it's very likely both things might not actually work. We just try them, and then, if they don't, we move on, we try new things. But if one of them does succeed, then hey, that's great. Or if both of them succeed, and then your problem becomes, now these both things are taken off like wildfire, then how do we converge them? I mean, in the scheme of things, that's kind of a good problem. So that 2 is better than 0, which is to say, okay, well, before we build anything, everyone has to get into a room and agree, and we'll have a committee, and we'll have multiple meetings, and we'll do our requirements gathering, and, it just slows down the velocity of how companies grow. Now, you might be asking, I don't know, Scott, I mean, all these people self-servicing this stuff, and people just building things in parallel, will that scale? And I want to say that's a great question. You were probably here at Martech last year when Sarah Cooper was one of our keynotes, and she shared 100 tricks to appear smart in meetings. Trick number 6 was, whatever the topic is, just ask, will this scale? But the other thing I would say is, if you're asking, I don't know, will this scale? I mean, just reminder, we're talking about Amazon here. I mean, if that isn't at scale, I don't know what is. Now, one of the way Amazon becomes comfortable with all this parallel processing of these, teams working independently is they think about decisions as being one-way doors or two-way doors, right? A two-way door decision is one that if you make the decision, you go through it and you're like, whoops, that was the wrong decision. You can actually just walk back out again, you can walk it back and try something else. Versus these one-way doors that, right, once the decision is made and you've tried it, there's no going back. And it turns out actually most decisions are two-way doors, And so once you embrace that, you're like, okay, listen, I mean, we can try these things, a lot of them in parallel, And again, those that don't work, that's the nature of experimentations. We just pull back and then we try something else. Now you might say, okay, I can see that in some cases, but not sure that I buy, that for SaaS software adoption. I mean, if you get all these different teams that are self-servicing their own particular SaaS tools, I mean, how does that not lead to a total Tower of Babel Martech stack, where the stuff just doesn't really, talk the same language? And this is actually where a trend in the Martech industry is really starting to help us out. So, we've been in a golden age of Martech for these past 10 years, right? I mean, we've just seen it in the adoption of this tech, the innovation around it. But one of the debates of this golden age of Martech for the past 10 years has been suite versus best of breed. Right? Suite being like, oh, well, I'll just get all my tools from one vendor. It all comes in a box. And the good thing is all those tools are supposed to then work together, in theory, right? They play nice together. The downside there is I'm essentially limited to what's available in that box. Versus best of breed, where I can pick out all my favorites across the entire Martech landscape, but it's really up to me to make sure that they, walk in the same direction, which wasn't an easy task. I really do believe we are entering a second golden age of Martech, and one of the characteristics of the second golden age is that we're moving from the debate of suite versus best of breed to, in many ways, the best of both worlds. This idea of platform ecosystems, that all of these major marketing systems are becoming open platforms. They're working with all these other app providers, to provide certified integrations so that marketers can choose apps from within a very large ecosystem that are designed to plug into that common platform and work in concert together. Now, platform. We hear this word a lot in business today. If you walk into any bookstore and you go to the business book section, all right, there's just a ton of books on platform. Machine platform, crowd, platform revolution, business of platforms. I think the only theme I see more frequently at bookstores these days is books that somehow use profanity in their title. Like, when did this become a thing? I mean, it's like literally WTF. I think the one I found the most reflective, I was like, huh, all right, interesting. Now, some of you know I published a book a few years ago, Hacking Marketing, which was all about taking software management practices and applying them to marketing management. And the publisher has been asking me if I would do a follow-up book. I've been thinking about that, and actually, I might have an idea now. All right. Stop that. No singing, no profanity, no rhyming. Platform. So what exactly is a platform, right? I mean, this word that keeps getting thrown around. And I think, in the context of our world, there's generally two kinds of platforms, right? There's platforms that are marketplaces, right? They're centers that match, producers and consumers. And then there's platforms that are technology. They're a common foundation upon which we build integrated systems. Other things connect to that or build on top of it. And there's a ton of examples of both of these kinds of platforms out there, right? Marketplaces, Fiverr and Airbnb and Uber, technology platforms like Android and iOS, Shopify. You even see, very often companies that have both kinds of platforms. So like the Apple App Store is a marketplace platform built around their iOS technology platform. Now, across technology companies, particularly SaaS companies, right, this shift from products to platforms has really been a big movement these past several years. And it's going from a product that is generally functionality built by an internal product team to a platform that has functionality both created by the internal product team and a broader external ecosystem. We certainly see this all throughout marketing technology. Essentially, at this point, all of the major, marketing systems out there are becoming open platforms. Now, I thought I might just sort of step back for a moment because when we talk about integrating marketing apps through marketing platforms, it's worth actually thinking a little bit about, well, what do you mean by integrating these things? Because in a cloud-based world, when you ask like, oh, well, does app A integrate with app B? The answer is almost always yes. I mean, some way, even if it's using like an iPass, you can take, data from, one app and, pipe it over to another. But there is a really big range of how deeply these things can be integrated. And so I'd like to share with you this model so that as you're evaluating software and how deeply it gets integrated, you can think about, all right, what do they mean? So there's data level integrations. And again, this is the most common thing we think of with integration. You can have very simple integrations that just sort of sling data, from one app to another without really thinking about what happens on the other side. But you can also get more sophisticated data integrations. They're really about syncing data between multiple systems. And this is a screen from a company called PieSync, and someone configuring integrations between HubSpot and MailChimp, and making sure that these data fields get mapped and they get synchronized across both systems. But in many ways, this is just the starting point, right? Then the next level up is workflow, right? As I've got all these different tools in my Martech stack, how do I start to think about processes that cross them, customer journey flows that cross these different tools. And to give you an example of this, so this is a screenshot from a company called Tray that is a great iPaaS. And you can see this is a workflow where, okay, there's a trigger of an event in Segment, based on what that event is, they then branch to saying, did the payment succeed? Did we update? Did the payment fail? If it did fail, let's get, subscriptions from Stripe. We might be sending an email reminder through Marketo. We might be, triggering a notification in Slack, right? It's looking at these patterns and flows across these tools. We can even take this to a level beyond that, which is, okay, so I've got things that are happening, flowing across these different tools. But for me, as a manager, as an administrator, as a person working with these tools, do I have to jump back and forth, between all these different browser tools and all these different interfaces for the different tools to configure them? Or can we start to have embedding of these capabilities within the user interface of a centralized tool? And a really simple example of this is like extensions in Gmail, showing you an example of how Atlassian created an extension for Gmail. So if I'm engaging with a customer around a ticket, I can actually get the information from Jira right there, embedded in the message. I don't have to go hopping around to some other different app. And then the fourth level of integration management is really around the governance of these different apps and the platform in which they connect. And this is something where the platform provider can bring a lot of value by assuring customers of a baseline level of, okay, well, we certify apps, we make sure that they're using APIs properly, we make sure they meet certain user interface standards, we can make sure that, there's security checks, we can, enforce things for compliance with regulations like GDPR. I mean, kind of a good example of this actually is the Apple App Store, right? They do a very rigorous process of evaluating, which apps they allow into the App Store to make sure that, again, when any consumer just chooses to install an app from that store, it's going to be a good actor. It's not going to be a bad actor in the ecosystem. Now, I know this was a little bit, on the more technical side. If you want, a simpler version of thinking about these four different levels of integration, how to remember them, we can think of data integration as nouns, the actual objects we pass back and forth. Workflow is really about the verbs, the actions we tend to take around those nouns. UI and UX is the language for nouns and verbs. Are we speaking the same tongue? And then governance is kind of like the grammar for that, the rules of what proper use of the language and all these verbs and nouns are. I told you, when I'm watching movies, I can't help but think of Martech. I was watching this version of Hamlet a little while ago, and all of a sudden I found myself thinking, to integrate or not to integrate, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in marketing to suffer the lost customers and poor insights of siloed data, or to buy a platform with a sea of certified apps, and by clicking, connect them. All right. I've been violating the rule there, right? No rhyming, no singing, no iambic pentameter. All right, we'll move on. So one of the things that's really interesting about this platform revolution that's happening in software companies is you start to see the parallel with the Martech maturity curve moving from embedded to absorbed. Why do software companies move to becoming platforms? Well, one is it changes the speed by which things get produced, right? If everything in your product must be built by your team, then inevitably, they've got this huge backlog of, things that everyone wants, and things have to wait in that backlog until it's their turn to get produced. Versus in a platform environment, anyone in the ecosystem can build that feature, that capability. This changes the bandwidth, right? You're no longer constrained by just your own engineering team. It's really the collective engineering team of all developers across the ecosystem. This also rolls into a much broader sense of creativity. It's not just limited to your internal staff, but you can have diverse external ideas from anyone in that ecosystem as well. Again, just as we saw with, Martech, the learning becomes much more widely distributed. I think the only difference, I might phrase a little differently, the goal is in platforms, you see companies moving from a model where, okay, well, it's really about owned innovation. What's the innovation that we've created? To, in a platform worldview, embracing this idea of open innovation. That what matters is the total collective innovation happening across the entire ecosystem. I mean, this is a really fascinating transformation that's been happening in software, this evolution from products to platforms. Moving from, these pipeline business models of, all right, it's all stuff we produce sequentially, to these open platforms where things happen in parallel. Value is no longer created just within the firm, but it's across the ecosystem. And then increasingly those companies, right, they're not just thinking about the customer experiences that they create, they think about the producer and partner experiences that they have as well. Now in marketing, we've been going through our own transformation here over the past 5 to 10 years, which has really been, changing from this worldview of a very project-oriented approach to marketing to kind of a product-oriented approach to marketing, right? We've moved from generally thinking about episodic campaigns to much more these always-on marketing programs and capabilities. As a result, as marketing managers, in a very real sense, we start to think more like kind of product managers, right? We own like a particular piece, of the customer journey, the customer experience, and we're continually iterating on that. It's this shift from being in the business of creating assets to really owning customer experience. And what's interesting is if we put these two transformations side by side, marketing going from project to product, and in software going from product to platform, kind of look at that, squint, it might be like, well, wait a second, what if we just sort of pull those product boxes together? And in marketing, we envision, all right, not just going from project to product, but starting to think about what marketing does as really a platform. As it turns out, this actually beautifully overlays with the Martech Maturity model. Project approach was assisted Martech. All right, we'll just use this little thing here and great, we're done. Product worldview was embedded Martech, the marketing ops, marketing tech team, that owns those products, that it provides to the rest of the marketing org. Absorbed is about marketing ops and marketing tech really creating these platforms that allow the entire marketing organization, the entire business, to really become an ecosystem. In fact, maybe it even goes beyond the walls of the business, into partners and channels as well. Now, I've talked a little bit about how we, make that at a high level, right? The APs of, self-service Martech. But of course, what you really want are a bunch of specific case examples. And this is why you really should have been at Martech, because we had a number of great companies, TD Bank and Deloitte and QuickBase and Red Hat and Ancestry and AKQA, share specific examples of how their companies or clients of theirs have been evolving to more of that absorbed ecosystem platform approach to marketing ops and marketing tech. But you can always come to the next Martech conference. Now, one more thing I want to leave you with, as the cliche goes. You're probably all familiar with Gartner's hype curve, right? This, hype curve, hype cycle, where the curve sort of begins with a technology trigger, it ramps up to this peak of inflated expectations, just peak hype. And then when people realize that, okay, the distance between hype and reality is too great, the market kind of crashes into the trough of disillusionment. But then over time, companies climb this slope of enlightenment of what's the real use of these technologies. And I've had a number of people suggest to me that this was the year that Martech crashed into the trough of disillusionment. That after all these years of very grand claims of all the amazing things Martech could do for you, turns out, this it's not that simple. And my reaction to Martech entering the trough of disillusionment is actually, wow. This is great. This is really great because, the thing that everyone forgets about Gartner's hype cycle, it is a cycle of hype, but kind of independent of that is the evolution of the technology itself. I mean, the technology and the practices of professionals using that technology are pretty much continually improving, at a much more rational pace. Now when the hype is like just overinflated, this is really problematic because, no matter how good your technology is, no matter how good your, practices as a professional, it can never live up to, what the hype is. But once you enter the trough of disillusionment, all of a sudden, the relationship between hype and reality invert. And now you're in a position where actually using good technology and using it well, developing our practices, to make this successful in what we actually deliver as results in our organization, it actually becomes much more real. And I think this is a really exciting time for not just the Martech industry, but really the Martech profession. Marketers have a chance to make Martech real as we climb the slope of enlightenment together. And that's actually what all of the sessions at the Martech conference, really focused on, is examples of companies and practitioners who are climbing the slope of enlightenment with marketing technology in their particular organizations. And so I'm really excited that we're now in this stage of Martech, and it's all about making it real. So our next speaker at Martech, who followed me, was the wonderful Matt LeMay, the author of the book Agile for Everybody. If you don't have a copy, I'd go check that out now. And I just wanted to say thank you for listening to this recreated version of the Martech keynote. I hope we get to see you at a future Martech. Thanks. Have a great day.